see here is Catalogs lumber, or also called ironwood. See, it's a gorgeous lumber. It's really hard, supposed to be really difficult to work with. The goal is to make out of these pieces a beautiful life edge table for my brother. You see, the wood looks both dark and light. These dark pieces, they're often red, sometimes purple, even black. These are almost black. By time they're supposed to get darker. I first need to plane these, and because I don't have a good planer, I will go to a friend of mine, Norbert, who has these machines to plane them. So that's the first thing we're going to do, is to plane them, make sure they're beautiful, they fit together, and then afterwards we're going to continue. As I said before, this is ironwood, or Catalogs, and if you look a little bit on the internet, everybody says how hard this wood is. It's really difficult to work with, they need special tools. Up until now, yes, it is hard. Planing it and cutting it took more time than with other lumber, but I found some of the reports I read on the internet a little bit overstated. We were able to do it without any special tools. So it worked pretty well. I spent some time looking at the different patterns the lumber has and matching them together. These are two boards here, match them together, made sure that here where the dark zone starts kind of bleeds into it. So this is beautiful and goes until the end. Here we have a little hole. That's on purpose. I didn't want to remove that. The goal is to fill this up with epoxy and put a little bit of gold in it, because the legs of the table will be golden too. You see here, similar. We have another hole, so glue this here together in the middle and at the end. On the other side you see a similar pattern here. There is a little bit white, here we have dark, matched it together until the end. So if you look at the table like that, you can imagine how it would look like. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue together these two, and once they're glued together, I'm going to fill these holes with epoxy, and then after that is done, I'll glue the other ones together. The reason is, to fill this with epoxy, I'll have to build like a little box to put it in, And if I glue all of them together, I have to build a really large box. So it's kind of more convenient to do it with a small one and then add the other ones later on. Okay, so I finished up gluing these together. You might have noticed that I put the clamps there where the glue is, obviously, and I put some aluminum bars below this because I don't like when the lumber glues to the table and you have to rip it off afterwards. So that's why I put these aluminum bars below it, and I'll let this dry for a while and then we can continue with the job. I need to fill these holes here with golden epoxy. And this is the top of the tabletop. I'm going to try to clamp this against this here to prevent the epoxy from leaking out. I'm kind of a little lazy to build a box to put that in, so I'm going to try to do a little bit different this time. I'm going to try to tape the bottom of the holes, and then afterwards I'm going to turn it, clamp it towards this table here. The table I'm going to wax a little bit so the epoxy doesn't stick to the table. I tried to tape here the edge, make sure nothing leaks. Now I'll turn it around and put it against this white board here to have an additional safety layer. So this is finishing wax. I'm going to put a layer on top of this board to prevent epoxy in case it leaks through the tape to stick. This is the upper side of the tabletop. It's going to be golden epoxy, but I'm not going to use the golden epoxy for the entire hole because that would be a waste. So I have a golden color which I will mix to the epoxy, but I will do the upper layer. The lower layer will be normal epoxy. And I'm going to start with this hole here. So I clamped everything against the board. I'm hoping nothing will leak here. And if this works, I'll do the other hole, clamp the other side. So that's the plan. So this hasn't been nearly enough epoxy, it needs to be a lot more. I am observing if something's leaking before I continue. It's very difficult to see in the camera. There is a very thin layer of epoxy laying here, and here you see the reflections. I am going to observe if anything is leaking here. That will be a place where leaking would be observed, but there is nothing up until now. Also nothing here. So for now this is looking good, but let's continue to observe. I have to say I'm pretty pumped how well it worked with taping and clamping against the board, really tight. There was no leak, nowhere. Everything worked. Pretty low bandwidth to prepare that way, and works well. So I think I'll continue to do that in the future. I will now unclamp it, turn it around, and tape it in a couple of other places here so we can continue with the epoxy. So there's no leaking at all. I think it's this tape that is pretty good. It's from Tesa Universal. I'll put a link in the description. It's really water resistant, it seems, and so there was no leaking. I think I'll continue to use that in the future. Okay, so now everything is taped. I'll turn it around, and I will also prepare the other boards on the outside with tape so I can start to put the epoxy on these two. Okay, so the next step will be to make some golden epoxy. You see spots like these? That's where the planer ripped out pieces of the woods, and so there's holes here. We have here similar spots. So there's two ways we could approach this. We could sand it down, so that's pretty deep here, so we'd lose a lot of thickness, and it's also a lot of work. But I'm going to make use of these because I want to put golden epoxy in the different holes, and so these give me the opportunity to actually fill it all with golden epoxy and then sand it down, make it really smooth, and that way we'll have golden spots all over the table. And you see, it's always on the white pieces that we have this, and so that's why I cleansed it all, and now I'm going to put like a layer of golden epoxy on all these and make it fill them, and then later on sand them down. Okay, so you see, this is really gold, so I might have used a little bit too much, but we'll see. There's never too much. It can't be gold enough for my brother, so I'm going to use this. Okay, so this has dried overnight, and you see here that the epoxy sunk a little bit more. So it's not plain here, and that happened with all the large cracks. I'm not going to worry about this right now. I'm going to flip the boards and glue them together, work on the bottom of the tabletop, and I'll fill these holes later on when I work on the top. dried now for about 10 hours, and now it's time to plan where the legs will go and to put some aluminum bars on it as an additional reinforcement. Okay, I did some measuring and I decided where I want to put the aluminum bars. I marked them here with tapes so I know where to cut them. Remember, this is not like exact science, so you can eyeball it a little bit. These will be below the table so people won't see it, so it doesn't have to be exact science. And now I'm going to cut these with the miter saw I have here. I put a blade on it for aluminum, so that should work fine. Done a couple of things off camera because I was stupid enough to forget my camera at home. I've attached all the aluminum bars to the tabletop, and it was more fiddly than expected. So I drilled holes into the bars, and then I drilled a hole into the wood to attach the screws with these counterparts here. Turns out that I made the holes the same size the screws, and depending on how you drill the holes on the wood, it creates a lot of pressure on the bars and you can't really drill them in completely. So it was really fiddly to get it right. So next time I will drill the holes in the bars a little bit larger than the screws. That way you will have a little bit more wiggle room to attach these. So I would recommend you do that. This is now stable, and I made a little bit more of epoxy and closed all the different cracks and holes that are in here. This is the back side, remember, so I didn't make golden epoxy, didn't care about that, just normal epoxy. 2 layers because a couple of cracks sucked in the epoxy, so I did a second. And now we're ready to sand. So this is the back side, so it doesn't have to be that pretty. Still, I will sand it with 40 grit, 80 and 120. And that should be enough. And after that, I will finish it in a similar way that I will do the upper part of the tabletop. That is recommended, so it doesn't create a lot of tension if you treat the bottom part in a different way that the other side. It could create like tensions when temperature changes and these kind of things. So I will give it a very similar coat, not the same fit and finish polish that the upper side, of course, but the plan is to do it pretty nicely. So that's it. I'm going to start with sand. This is going to take a lot of time. I'll start with a bandsaw and 40 grit paper. Pass with 40 grit sandpaper is done. I'm going to clean up the dust a little bit, and then I'm going to fix a couple of leftover cracks with epoxy. Only after that I'm going to start with the 80 grit sandpaper. This is Mineral Spirit. That's pretty good to clean up the dust. sanded the entire table from the back. That should be fine. And now I'm going to take off a little bit of the edge with the router, round it up a little bit on this side. I will do the same on the other side when it's turned. And afterwards I will start with the finish. Here you see how I rounded the edge with the router. Obviously this is going to be sanded afterwards and cleaned up, but that's more or less how it's going to look here, and of course also on the other side. Beautiful. Gorgeous. Don't you think so? So I'm going to let this soak in a little bit, dry, and then I'm going to start with the poly. See you later. Okay, this is dry by now. I'm not thrilled of how the finish ended up being, and I could continue to fiddle around and make it better, but I'm kind of bored to work on the backside. I'll leave it like that, and now I'm going to measure where the leg should be, attach some screws, and then we're ready to turn the table.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, so before I turn the table, I'm going to try and clean up a little bit like the edges. You see that, first of all, they're dirty with dust and stuff, but then also you see that in some places epoxy ran over it, or color like from the polyurethane and stuff. So I'm going to try to clean up these edges before I turn it. Welcome back, my friends. As you see, I was able to turn the tabletop yesterday with the help of a couple of friends, and now the fun part starts. I'm going to start to sand down everything, starting with 40 grit paper, the belt sander, then 80 grit, then 120, and continue with the orbital sander. That's the plan. Let's get started. has been sanded up to 180 grit paper. Smooth, it's nice. I'm going to use a sanding primer, which will help to make it even smoother. So the next step is to paint the entire tabletop with a sanding primer. Okay, so I'm going to start now with the first layer of polyurethane. See the oil, the mineral oil has dried, has soaked in, and the color is beautiful. So now we're ready to start with the polyurethane. And I don't know how many layers I'm going to brush. I might also add some spray paint layer over it, so we'll see how the finish turns out. But now it's time for the first layer. Okay, welcome back. This is done now. 6 layers of spray paint. After 6 layers of spray paint, I think it's pretty smooth and it's shiny. So I think we're almost done. There's a couple of small things left here, especially like we need to finish it because so when the spray paint dries, little pieces of dust land on it. There's a couple of places where the finish has bumps, so we need to finish that, and let me show that to you. You see here, you can see it in the light. There's a couple of small spots where it's rough. It's not major, but these kind of things we can get rid of. That's the next thing we'll do. I'll go over the entire tabletop with a small rag to get rid of that, and then afterwards we're going to polish it, and then we're done. I'm going to do this using this little rag here. It's like from 3M. It's just the right texture to get rid of these things without damaging the coat. And so I'm going to pass through the entire tabletop with that to get rid of all these small spots. Last step is to polish the entire tabletop, so I'm going to apply some paste finishing wax on the entire tabletop, and I'm going to let it soak in 10-15 minutes, and then polish everything, and then we're done. That's it. I'm done. This turned out pretty nice, pretty happy. Now I'm going to wrap it completely. It's going to be transported to a flat from my brother, and I'm going to put the legs on it. And so let's get that last piece started.